Shalom, how's everyone doing? Today is day 35 of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. We'll be learning Siman, Seif. Tinok, let's say you have an infant, Sha'acherim b'yamav, that other infants his age, Yecholin lechol kizayis minei dagan, are able to eat a kizayis of grain, afilo alei de tafshil, even through it being cooked, bichdei shegadol ochel sheprasrei, they can eat in the same time frame that it takes a gadol to eat a half loaf of bread. V'chasav v'seif migdal oz lagon marina harav Yaakov Emden ben Tzvi zilchol levracha. Rav Yaakov Emden writes, Dahainu kishnasa ben shana. That happens when a child turns 1 year old. Marchikin mitzuaso mimei raglav. We distance ourselves from his soa and from his meraglaim. V'tov yashar is very proper. Laharchik gam mitzuas katan ben shmonu yam, to distance ourselves from the soa even from an 8-day-old. Okay, so obviously we've been learning the halachas that when one saying Zvar Mishbuk he has to distance himself from Soa and Meraglaim. But what the Kitzur is clarifying here is that not all Soa and Meraglaim is a din of Soa and Meraglaim. Right? It only is a din of Soa and Meraglaim if it's coming from a someone from a certain age, as we'll see. Right? So this is really coming from Gemara Masechah Sukkah. The Gemara Masechah Sukkah says very clear, Yachol lachol kazayis dagan marchikin mitzewaso. You only have to start distancing yourself from soa of a katan once he's able to eat a kazayis of grain. Rav Chisda adds, right? He has to eat that. He has to be able to eat that amount of grain in the time frame of kidei achilas pras. And then Rav Chia adds that, let's say we're dealing with an older child, right, like a gadol, which the Pri Megadim says is a 6 or 7 year old. But let's say you have the 6 or 7 year old who also is not able to eat a kazayis of grain in kidei achilas pras. Still, once he becomes old enough, we do have to separate from his tzah. Okay, but where is this all coming from? So we have to look in Rashi, right? Rashi says the reason that if like a very small child makes tzah, right, he uses the bathroom, makes tzah, we don't have to distance ourselves from his tzah, is because the only reason why tzah smells bad is because it comes from dagan. It comes from grain. So before a katan starts eating grain, it's not going to smell that bad. Right? That's what Rashi says. Mishachal kazayis me'elu misrachas. Right? So it comes from the food we eat. But it's only going to smell bad if you're having this kazayis of grain. So that's why if you look in the Beis Yosef, he learns in Shitas Rashi, he goes so far to say that it's a very practical thing. Right? Let's say we have a child who, he ate a little bit of grain, used the bathroom. So obviously that tzah will have a din of tzah. But let's say he hasn't eaten grain, like you don't feed him grain that much. He had a little bit of grain that day, made tzah, and then like a few days later he makes tzah again, but you haven't fed him grain since. That tzah wouldn't smell bad because it's not coming from the grain. So therefore it's a very practical thing. So we look at it, did this kid eat the grain or not? That's all we're looking at. But if you look in the Beis Yosef doesn't think that's the correct shot. Beis Yosef says, you know what the Gemara is saying? The Gemara is not saying like a very practical thing, like we look at to see if this kid personally ate grain, and then we see if his soa is soa. Rather, it just depends on the age of the kid, right? Let's say, for argument's sake, let's say like the Kitzur, that kids start eating kazayis of grain 1 year old. So let's say, but your kid didn't. Let's say your kid didn't, and he made tzah when he was 1 year old, right? So according to Rashi, you probably don't have to distance yourself from that, right? Because it's a very practical thing. Did you have that kazayis of grain, and therefore your tzah smells bad, or did you not? But according to Beis Yosef, he says no. It's a general rule that we have to find out the age that kids start eating this amount of food, and even if your kid personally did not eat that amount of food, you still have to distance yourself from it when you say Dvar Mishbuk. So Rashi makes a lot of sense, that it's a very practical thing, that, right, kizayis minei dagan makes tzah smell bad, and therefore one has to distance himself from it. But what's pshat in the Beis Yosef that is just like a general rule that we look at the age when a kid starts eating that. So there's two explanations. One is what the Pri Chadash says. The Pri Chadash says, the Bavli doesn't actually sound like the Beis Yosef. because the Bavli seems to be clear, not like the Beis Yosef, because the Bavli then says a line. It says a gadol, once a kid reaches a certain age, that he's not really a child anymore, he's like an older child, then it says, even if that gadol didn't eat kazayis mini dagan b'ktei achilas pras, we still separate. So it's really mashma from the Gemara that if he's still a kachan, we don't separate. So it's seemingly, we have a proof against the Beis Yosef. But he says, if you look in the Yerushalmi gives a reason why we start separating from the tzoa of a katan at a certain age, and it says there, because machshavos raos. Because at that point, when he's able to, when he gets to that stage, he has bad machshavos, and the bad machshavos actually makes the tzoa smell bad. So therefore, that's probably where the Beis Yosef is coming from, right? According to our Pashut of the Bavli, it seems like a more practical thing, like Rashi said, right? Kazayis mini dagan makes the tzoa smell bad. But according to the Yerushalmi, it's the machshavos raos of a kid that makes the tzoa smell bad, nothing to do with what he eats, really. Okay, so that might be one pshat. The second pshat is what the Mishnah Berurah says. He's quoting the Pri Megadim, and he says as follows. He says, "Afilo im be'etzem lo achal hakatan me'olam." Right? Let's say this kid never ate kizayis mine dagan. Right? So obviously, according to Rashi, you would not have to separate from his tzoa. However, mikam makom im betivo hayayachol achol kizayis dagan b'chtei achilas pras. But let's say he's physically able to. You just haven't fed him that. Then no. Habnei meyai masrichem kol minei maichal sheyochal. Right, even if he personally hasn't ate the kazayis mini dagan, so maybe according to Rashi, his tzoa wouldn't smell bad, but the Beis Yosef learns just the fact that he's able to eat a kazayis mini dagan makes his tzoa smell bad, even if he eats other foods. Right, and that's how you explain that. The Gemara is talking about a gadol, that once he's 6 or 7, all rules go away, and you always have to distance yourself from that tzoa. That's talking about a gadol who's actually not physically able to eat a kazayis mini dagan. It's not that just he hasn't eaten. So, right, we have the shita of Beis Yosef, we have a shita of Rashi, which is a major nafkamina. The major nafkamina is, according to Rashi, you only have to distance yourself from a tzoa of a child who's actually physically eaten kazayis mini dagan, because we're afraid that the tzoa came from the kazayis mini dagan. But according to the Beis Yosef, no, we don't care if he actually ate it, we just care about has he reached the stage that other kids eat it. So, who do we hold? Like Rashi or like the Beis Yosef? So, it turns out that most, actually, shitos do hold like Rashi, right? The Eliyah Rabbah, the Magen Avram, the Bach. But the Mishnah Berurah says that we're dealing with the Isser Torah here, right? There's a Deoraisa idea that one time I would say the Devam Shepikdusha by Tzoa. So he says, since we're dealing with the Deoraisa, we really should be Machmir. And we should try to find out the age of a kid, where he's able to eat a kazayis mini dagan, we would have to distance ourselves from his tzoa, even if the kid we're dealing with personally did not. So that's what he says. He says that l'chadchila we should be careful about this. So the question is, we really have to find out the age where a normal kid eats a kazayis mini dagan, right? If we want to keep this halacha. So, right, if you look in the Sefer Bir Halacha, he says it's very hard to find out this age, because there's big machlokas how much it consists of a kazayis. There's a major machlokas about what's this time frame of Kidei Achilas Pras, like how big is a pras, like it's a major question. Therefore, it's really hard to know. So we have what the Kitzur says. The Kitzur says a year. It says a year. So that is we could go with that because it's hard to tell. Basically, if you look at the CDC, they like a medical thing. They say that you shouldn't really feed grains to children until they're 6 months old. So I don't know if that has any nafkamina. But anyways, so that's what we'll say. We'll go with the Kitzur 1-year-old. Okay. But then he says one last thing, and he says that even so of an 8-day-old, that goes against the Gemara. The Gemara says only when he starts eating grains. Like no kid starts eating grain when he's 8 days old. So you have to look in Yeridea, in Hilchos Bris Milah, that there's a Beis Yosef there. There are quotes the Beis Yosef that first Shulchan Aruch says halacha that when you're giving your kid a milah, you don't have to cover the makom erva. That you don't have to do. But the Ramah then says, but it's a nice thing to clean off the kid from tzoa before you give him the milah. So the Magen Avram says in Siman Pei Aleph in Orach Chaim that we kind of see from here that Why do we have to clean the kid from tzoa when you're doing the milah? Because seemingly we should be choshesh and say like even tzoa from a 8-day-old has as a lechatchila idea of separating ourselves from it. If you look in the Shulchan Aruch, he says lav dafka 8-day-old, even a 1-day-old we should separate from his tzoa. But if you look in the Aruch HaShulchan, the Aruch HaShulchan says the Magen Avraham got it wrong. True. The Ramah says this then that we're supposed to set before we do a milah, we should clean the kid off from tzoa. But that's not a hilchas tzoa halacha. That's a hilchas mitzvah halacha. Right? When you're doing a mitzvah's milah, you should do it in a clean place. Right? It's not saying it's also to say brachos. Right? We say a bracha milah. It's not also to say a bracha from a tzoa of a very small child. Rather, we should clean him off as like a hitter mitzvah of the mitzvah. Okay, shkoyach.